Executive director of the Milwaukee Election Commission that multiple sites were either running low or ran out of ballots. At least those were the reports that they were getting earlier this evening. Now, according to the executive director, they are sending more resources to these places, trying to make sure that they have what they need. We obviously still have some time to go until polls close. We initially got that notice around 30 minutes ago, so she noted there was still an hour left, and they were trying to make sure these resources got to these places. But 7 sites in particular, she noted, had no ballots, or at least made reports of having no ballots.
The discussions I had with President Trump in Florida, I basically, 2 very simple messages. Number one, he is probably the only person in the world who can mediate the peace between Ukraine and Russia. Why? Because Putin respects and in many ways fears Donald Trump. Secondly, the point I had was that we need a ceasefire and we need a date for the ceasefire. And that date should be the 20th of April. And if President Putin, who's the only one who's not accepting a ceasefire, because Americans wanted, the Europeans wanted, the Ukrainians wanted, if he doesn't oblige by the ceasefire, then we should go for a colossal set of sanctions coming from the United States and Europe.
Что происходит, блядь? Что происходит? Пацаны, не трогайте пацана. Я на видео снимаю, все, пацаны. Женя, пошел.
Хуйло ебаное. Я вас в рот ебал, пидор.
Ну, потому что они нас воспринимают обезьяной с гранатой. И просто опасные игрушки хотят взять под свой контроль. Они же знают про наши планы взорвать все атомные станции, если Украина будет проигрывать. Буданов носился с этим годика-полтора назад.
Серьезно?
Типа все взорвем, все российские, до которых дотянемся, и все наши, там, да, ну, чтобы никому не досталось. Носил это всерьез в офис, там, предлагал и прочее, прочее. Что там еще у нас? По принципу сдохнем все, но с собой всех утянем. Они знают про наши планы страшные, там Гороховский собирал на ядерное оружие, значит, надо контролировать. Что не вменяем, группа невменяемых, поэтому лучше все опасные производства взять под контроль. Вот и все, что это. Просто демократы делали это кулуарным давлением и выделением грантов на изучение полового диморфизма у полевых мышей, населяющих атомные станции. Вот. Или кузнечиков. А эти парни простые, они говорят, что, ребята, давайте так, мы просто забираем под управление и все. Это не потому, что они отбирают у нас имущество, они отбирают у нас то, что может быть опасным для человечества и для нас самих в первую очередь.
Welcome back to the SCIF. Thanks for joining us today. The world is blowing up, and as John Wayne said, life's tough, but it's tougher if you're stupid. So don't be stupid. Watch the SCIF every morning, 10 to 12. a.m. Eastern, and we'll keep you informed so you're the smartest at the office. The world is blowing up, as I said. We're going to go around the world today, actually. We're going to go across the pond later in the show and talk with Gawain Towler, who was the comms guy for Brexit and for reform, very tight with Nigel, and we'll get what's going on in the UK. We have Sakari Linden from Finland, who's a geopolitical analyst, and he was just in Russia, and we're going to get some very on-the-ground insight as to what's happening there. We have Linda Sinkowitz from Connecticut to talk about election fraud in the second hour. Just a really packed show, but the icing on the cake, we're going to have very shortly Dan Eastman from Wisconsin to talk about what happened last night. It's not good, but he's going to bring us all into that. This is your mission brief. Today is April 2nd, 2025, and here is your 5 points. Election fraud in Wisconsin, too big not to see. The UK is dying. Will it be saved? Turkey-Israel confrontation. You saw the troops moving into Syria, Turkish forces. Ukraine continues to strike Russian energy infrastructure and may have a doomsday plan. And what's going on with Iran, World War III preparation in the Middle East? Are negotiations near? We're going to jump right into it and bring in Dan Easton. Dan, thanks again. Late notice last night. You were sending me what's happening there, and I said, well, come on. We want to hear from the horse's mouth. So what's going on, my friend?
Well, it was an interesting day yesterday in Wisconsin, election day, and usually nonpartisan judicial races and school board races really don't rise to the level of international intrigue. But unfortunately, this particular election does, because Wisconsin has elected Supreme Court justices. We have 7 of them, and they're elected to 10-year terms. The reason we have elected judges is because if the governor were to appoint them, there would be corruption. So we elect them instead. Okay. Well, unfortunately, we have nonpartisan judges, and they don't run as Republican or Democrat. They're supposed to be above the fray and neutral and objective, like the lady with the scales and the blindfold, Lady Justice. Well, anyway,
what we all believed for a long time.
Right. And unfortunately, the election yesterday was very much a parallel and a mirror of elections that have been happening in Wisconsin since at least 2016. There are algorithms at play within the data, and we saw yesterday a very sad phenomenon. Voter turnout at the polling place on election day, which is the traditional way Americans vote, was off the charts. There were counties and municipalities running out of ballots. People were showing up. All of the statistics, we had very sophisticated people watching the voter turnout at the polling place, and all of them said this is a record. We are flooding the polls with Republican voters. And lo and behold, the candidate favored by the Republicans burns up in flames, loses by 200,000 votes to the candidate favored by the left wing. Both of these candidates funded by billionaires, by the way. Of course, the left winger wins the seat, preserves the liberal majority of the court, and now they're allegedly going to be redistricting Wisconsin. Wisconsin has 2 Democrat seats in the House of Representatives and 6 Republican. By the time they're done, the House will be Democrat. Okay, that's a problem. But the bigger problem is that we have been watching this data for a very long time, from election cycle after election cycle. And what is more and more clearly evident from the data is that this phenomenon of mailed ballots is a problem. And this is where you can stuff the ballot box. If you'd like to know how to win an election, you merely plant 150 or 500,000 or 1 million extra names in the voter roll, and then you vote their ballots like a proxy, basically like a corporate proxy or an insurance proxy. You sign the thing, somebody votes your ballot until you decide to revoke it. This is what's happening, and it is impossible to overcome, because if we look yesterday at the results, the ground game by the conservative voters was phenomenal. They showed up and they voted, but they could not overcome the already tabulated precast ballots that started 27 days before the election. They're mailed out, or 47, 45 days in a federal election. Those ballots are floating around, and they're back to the clerk, and the clerk gets them. They open the envelope and they tabulate. The ground game couldn't overcome the pre-stuffed ballot box. This is the big problem with this mail-in voting, because you can't control it. And others are. I mean, it's obvious now. We've got election data from 2016. Every 2 years, we have a statewide race. And it's very clear that this is a manipulated process, and it's a very sophisticated process. Not one person doing one thing. This is the type of stuff you see if you want to overthrow an election in South America. This is how they do it. This is how they do it. And if you can
is this a state?
You can certainly overthrow an election in Wisconsin with 6 million people.
This is like a state actor, right? I mean, this is like a state actor coming in and doing this, right?
This is very sophisticated players, whether it's the government or whether most likely NGOs. I mean, when you think about how sophistication operates globally, we like to point at a government agency full of people in trench coats and say they're the ones. The reality is this is all privatized. There are private security firms that do really spooky stuff around the world. And this is what is happening in Wisconsin and other swing states, because we've been watching the game change. If you go back to 2016, Jill Stein and Hillary Clinton were sure that the machines were switching the votes, Now we're talking about absentee ballots being precast. In 2020, that was a big part of the game. It was the COVID phenomenon. This Supreme Court I'm talking about, the liberal Supreme Court in Wisconsin, the conservative court ruled that drop boxes for ballots were illegal. 18 months later, when the power shifted, they reversed themselves and said, now they're okay. And when do you see a Supreme Court reverse itself in 18 months? It takes the concept of stare decisis and shreds it. And, as a practitioner, somebody who's been practicing law since Moses, let me tell you, stare decisis is what we base Anglo-American law upon. Our due process rights, all of our fundamental rights, constitutional rights are based upon this idea that the law stays consistent over time. But when you're playing with politics and using the courts to achieve ends, like you were seeing with President Trump and these federal judges, the judiciary is breaking apart. That is not the traditional role of the judiciary, and it is destroying our democratic model of a legislature and a governor/president, a legislative and an executive. We might as well sell the Capitol building, fire the legislature, give the governor a lawnmower, and just have 7 judges decide how we're going to live our lives. And that's where we're going.
So there was
a hammer, and off you go. This is a problem.
You made a good point in that they may have just switched their method or vector of fraud from the machines or the drop boxes to this mail-in ballot voting, and it's been a problem all over the country, from Florida, as we were talking yesterday. Are people? You were telling me last night that people are waking up to see this stuff. Is that happening?
It is, and it's frustrating because there's been a lot of effort at the ground level with Wisconsin conservatives, and Wisconsin's a socially conservative place. It is. They maybe tend to be a little soft Democrat, but the reality is it's a conservative population waking up and getting involved in politics, going to the polls and voting, believing the system works, only to watch a massive blowout. You got people standing in line. You got 85% turnout in a lot of areas. For what? For what? And people say, you know what? I'm not doing that again because it doesn't matter how I vote. And that's when democracy collapses. And that's when the bad guys win. They know that. If you can demoralize a voting population and you're controlling the number of votes by algorithm in each county, it's very easy to win. And this model's been used for decades in Latin America and Europe to fiddle around with other people's elections. And all you have to do is look at that, look at the methodology. So the people are waking up and saying, you know what? I don't want to be excited about the next election, put in the lawn signs, write a check. For what? It's already settled. That's not good for democracy. And I think we really need to deal with that, because if we lose the enthusiasm of the conservative vote, it's over. I mean, this is a very serious place that we are. And
so how do you combat that in Wisconsin? How do you combat that motivation issue and the fraud issue?
It's really, from the fraud perspective, we have enough data and we have been analyzing the methodologies. And I think that data set is complete to the point where those in power can look at that mechanism and deal with it. But from the psychological perspective, we've had, Turning Point USA drumming out votes, and we got the guy with the ponytail running around, and all these people are stimulating the conservative base. Meanwhile, the Republican establishment is just absolutely ineffective. And that's where the millions of dollars goes. If you look at where the money goes in Wisconsin politics, it goes to the Republican Party of Wisconsin, RPW. And it gets paid to the same consultants. And what they've lost 23 out of 25 statewide races, and you keep giving them money. I mean, you don't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Sort of the Einstein metaphor. They should be resigning today and turning power over to a new group of people. But they won't.
How's the media up there? Is there any conservative media, or not a conservative even, like MAGA media in Wisconsin?
There really isn't. Gannett Publishing bought up, I think, 26 or so newspapers in Wisconsin around the state. They own Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. So it's a very homogenous message on the front page. That tends to be the dominant media. And then, of course, there's talk radio, but there's generational shifts happening within talk radio. It's kind of burning itself out. And at the end of the day, everyone that I know is reading news on, basically on their cell phone through chat rooms and other information platforms. And unfortunately, the left is very well organized in that. If you look at the community groups in Wisconsin, they set up Facebooks that are exclusive to people who are friendly to voting Democrat. And you're invited in. And if you don't vote Democrat, you're kicked out. And of course, in subdivisions where people are transient, they want to belong. You move to a new state, new city, you want to belong. Well, you join the club, you're expected to vote. And they do. They're harvesting behind a screen, a black curtain, a screen, and creating a grassroots movement of people that effectively, you better vote for our candidates or you're not in the group. You're not in the club. We're going to kick you out. This is a real problem. It's happening all over the state. You see it at the school board level. You see it at the common council level, the county level. I've run for county supervisor twice, and I have that problem in my district, that there are subdivisions with a private chat room that I can't see in as a candidate, and I'm telling everybody what a bad candidate I am. This is a problem. So the left is very well organized with this ground game. And the right, they host events and fundraisers, and it's an echo chamber of the same 30 people that go to event after event after event. And you have a few grassroots people putting up lawn signs, and then they mail. Like, I can't tell you how many Schimmel mailings I got. I'm well known as a guy who's going to vote conservative, Republican. I must have 50 of these big postcards. You'd think that the people spending the money would think about not sending a guy who's 100% voting 50 postcards. They waste money. They have no idea.
That's how the grift is done, Dan.
It's a grift. Man, you look at the millions of bucks where these candidates spend their money, and it all goes to these consultants, and they lose time after time after time. And then we have a group in Wisconsin that did actual door-knocking surveying of people who live at addressers. And we find out that the database that they use is only 27% accurate. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? 70+% inaccurate data, and they're running around campaigning and mailing off of that? The candidates are being burned by this. Is, like I mentioned this yesterday, that there's an element of fraud. If you could talk some millionaire into running statewide office, and you get them to spend millions of bucks through through the process, and you get the same result you got the last 10 times, you have to ask the question. I mean, how is that? And these questions need to be asked, because where are we going to get someone to run statewide in 2 years against our current Democrat governor?
Dan, we're going to take a quick break.
Spend it, and nobody with a brain is going to do it. So
hang with me, Dan. We'll be right back. We're going to take a quick break.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
Pandemic, we can never be caught unprepared again. And so many Americans, when COVID hit, they had nothing in the house. Stores were shut down, and doctors' offices were shut down. And even if doctors prescribed drugs, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, pharmacists wouldn't fill the prescriptions. That was a nightmare.
Now the situation is much worse. We have these horrible supply chain problems. In our emergency medical kit at the Wellness Company, we have 8 prescription drugs that are all potentially life-saving.
Most people who died with COVID, they died in the hospital because they didn't receive early treatment.
Every American family should have one of these.
I can tell you the Wellness Company kit is the answer.
So we are in the factory in Kentucky. This is Alp World HQ, and we are at the end of the packing line. So I'm going to show you how it works. We have the card, throw it in there. There's a packing slip, and then you have the Alp. And 4, but that seems honestly like a lot. 3 now, but it's good. You just pack a punch that, you know, for a normal nicotine brand, it'd be like 8. You know, we think 3 is fine. Next one. Again, 4. Let's throw 3 in just to keep it fair. Okay? There you go. So you can see you can get fast at this. And really, it's just a matter of repetition. This is kind of the assembly line that, you know, Henry Ford devised so long ago.
Tucker stealing all the Alp again.
So we're back with Dan Easton. Please support our sponsors, guys. Support the Wellness Company. And if you're a nicotine user, a nicotine pouch user, go to alppouch.com/CDM and get rid of the woke Zen and support us and support Tucker. Dan, back to you. Let me ask you, all this stuff's going to the U.S. mail, right? So
Right.
Is there a way to counter that federally, you think?
We need President Trump to sign an executive order immediately. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the United States Post Office, by definition of being president, stopping the use of the U.S. mails to deliver ballots. And here's why. Last night, I was very active communicating with my people.
I know.
A lot of Wisconsinites, I'm sorry.
I saw it. Yeah. Go ahead.
That's right. A lot of Wisconsinites, we were called snowbirds. They head down to Arizona or Florida, places warm for the winter, and they asked to have their ballots mailed to them, and the clerks dutifully mail them out. And then they fill them out and they mail them back to the clerk. It was a stunning number, and it's in the thousands as of this morning, of people who were in the South who mailed their ballot back to the clerk, but the clerk never received the ballot. It was intercepted. It never got back to the clerk. It wasn't counted. So these people down here think that they voted, they do their civic duty, they mail their ballot back. It never got to the tabulator. So when you start thinking about using the mail to use election fraud, if you use the mail to do financial fraud, you know, it's wire fraud, it's mail fraud, that's a federal offense. People go to jail all the time, have been since the 1930s. You use the mail to commit ballot fraud, no problem. If you use the mail to intercept somebody's ballot and shred it because you know they're a Republican, first of all, if people are in the Sun Belt, probably a Republican. And secondly, there are all sorts of databases. If you want to run information on people, public data, and see if they're vote Republican, you can find that. And then if when that's coming through your local post office, or at least the central post office in Milwaukee, which clears everything, those ballots disappear, they get lost or whatever, that's an interception. So you can use the mail to cheat by using it to cheat, or you can use the mail to intercept and basically deny someone the right to vote. That's why President Trump can stop this today. Sign an executive order. You're not using the U.S. mail for ballots. If you want a ballot, we're going to FedEx it to you, or you're going to come pick it up. You know, then we can always accommodate the handful of people who are disabled. And they're really loud because they're funded by a lot of USAID money. Okay, they show up with a whole room full of lawyers. But the reality is you can always for the money they've spent, you could hire a limousine and send a deputy to that person's house and get that ballot and bring it back, and you'd be money ahead. And I think Doge has proved that. This is what we need to do, is to stop the use of the U.S. mail for the purpose of committing fraud. And this is on the books today. You can do it today. President Trump could sign this.
So President Trump, I think, thinks, I saw his post today, he won the voter ID issue last night because I think that was just too big. But he thinks Wisconsin's fine. He's like, you know, we won in 2024. We won last night. Nobody's
wasn't fine in 2020. It wasn't. I remember some lawsuits. Let me explain this about this constitutional amendment in Wisconsin. First of all, the voters don't vote on the language of the amendment. They vote on language, and then the Legislative Reference Bureau drafts the language and it gets put into the Constitution. Voters didn't approve the actual language. Secondly, if anybody bothered to read the language we all voted on last night, it clearly states that the legislature can limit or modify that right by passing a law. Well, that's not a constitutional amendment. It's a reference in the Constitution to the legislative power. And who's overseeing the legislative power? It's the judiciary. That was a red herring. So everybody thinks, oh, we got the amendment passed. If you read the language, you realize that the legislature has the ability to basically disregard the very thing you think you're passing. So that's the problem when people don't understand what's happening in these elections.
So how can the White House be so unknowledgeable about this?
Read the language on the ballot, okay?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know why that happens. But I think it's important when you're advising the president of the United States that at least you understand the language of the amendment people are voting on and say, you know what, this is a red herring amendment. You amend the Constitution to give the legislature the authority to decide what that means with respect to ID. That isn't a constitutional prohibition or requirement. All you did was enable the legislature to do what they have the right to do by law. You know?
Wow.
What can I say? What can I say?
So where do we go in Wisconsin? We got a couple more minutes, but what do we need to do? What's the path forward?
Well, we are thinking about that this morning. We've been battling this battle since 2016. First the Democrats in 2016, then the Republicans in 2020, 2024. Now we are, 2025. If we ramp up our ground game, we can't compete with the Democrat ground game, which is high tech and digital and fantastic. If we look at technology, we're stopped by the government, the state government who regulates the election technology. The courts have ignored complaints. I think we filed 12 or 13 complaints so far. Very few wins. We've had maybe 3 or 4 wins, one of which was overturned by the Supreme Court when the power changed. So what do you have? It's a time for retrospection and inflection. So
I'll give you an idea. Free media is really key, and we have papers all over the state that have been really, or all over the country, they've been really impactful. Georgia, Florida, Connecticut. We run to the sound of the guns. So maybe we should open a digital online entity in Wisconsin to help you fight the controlled media effort.
Well, we have to do that because talk radio is very middle of the road Republican in Wisconsin. They tend to think they're conservatives, but we are looking at we need to see election reform with a Republican legislature clinging by its fingernails, a Democratic governor who knows better than to ever sign anything. I think there's been 20 bills that he's vetoed. We're gridlocked there. The only hope was the courts. That's gone. It's public information and breaking the psychological monopoly on assuming that the Democrats are less dangerous than they are, or assuming that the Republicans are more competent than they are. We need to get clarity of thought into the masses. And that's what the left's been doing since the 1930s. They have not started last week. The 1930s, the 1960s were critical periods in leftist thought. And we have not had that experience probably since maybe William F. Buckley. It's been a long time. It's been a very long time. So it's time to start shifting the intellectual and the psychological paradigm, or we're lost.
Dan, thank you for coming on. We'll have you back. I don't think this story is going to go away, and I'll talk to you offline about starting some kind of media effort up there. So
Very
really
good.
Appreciate it. All right.
Thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Right. Ciao. Bye.
Government doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
True life Alp story. I got a call from a friend of mine yesterday, honestly, true story, who said his girlfriend had just broken up with him over Alp. He wouldn't stop. And I thought to myself, that's kind of sad. And he said, no, it's not sad. Imagine if I'd married her. Now I know. I was saved. Then the next day, this same friend is driving at twice the speed limit through a major American city, pulled over by a cop in a speed trap. Cop takes his license registration, goes back to the patrol car, runs him, comes back, looks in the window, and sees a tin of Alp on the dashboard. Pauses, stunned, says to my friend, "You use Alp?" "Yeah, I do," says my friend. "So do I," says the cop. "We all do." He looks at my friend thoughtfully and goes, "Drive safely, sir," and hands back his license and registration. No ticket. So in 2 days, he's saved from a tragic marriage to a girl who doesn't like Alp and a speeding ticket. All true. It's more than a nicotine marriage.
Welcome back to the SCIF. We're honored to have first time on the show Sakari Linden from Helsinki. I'm going to bring him on, and we're going to dig right into what's going on in Moscow and in Europe. Hey, thank you for coming on, Sakari. You come well recommended. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So you are a geopolitical analyst in Helsinki, but you were just in Moscow, and I'm curious. Was it Moscow where the conference was, or was it in another city in Russia?
So actually, I'm based in Brussels because I formerly worked in the European Parliament as a political advisor, and I participated in the Arctic Forum, which took place in Murmansk, so in the Arctic region of Russia.
A very important subject and geographic area for the U.S. We're talking about Greenland, Canada. Russia is increasing its capability, and China's getting involved. Russia has a very strong capability in the Arctic with icebreakers and a military presence and research. What was your impression coming from the conference?
Yeah, the conference was a really big event, and it highlighted how big an issue is the Arctic and all the opportunities which the Arctic region provides, not only for Russia but for and not only for Arctic countries but for the whole world. Mm-hmm. So it became very visible that now that the collective West has got its ties, even on environmental cooperation. The vacuum is being filled by other countries, mainly BRICS countries like China and India. But what was very interesting to read some weeks ago, that the United States at the moment is interested in making a new kind of cooperation with Russia in the Arctic region. So that would be one example more about the capabilities of the United States to play European Union and European countries outside of economic opportunities.
What was the mood of the Russian people, Russian officials, regarding what's happening in the world? You've got peace negotiations in Ukraine. You've got Zelensky still trying to keep the war going. I mean, what did you feel like the people were? What was their view of the world, if you will?
I felt like, of course, Russian people, Russian leaders are aware of the extremely high tensions in the world at the moment. But simultaneously, they are quite self-confident. They are aware what is the situation on the ground in Ukraine, and I felt like they think that they can end up in a good outcome in the negotiation with the US and eventually with the European Union if needed.
Do you think? I mean, you're from Helsinki, though, right? That's your.
I'm from Finland, but from another part of the country. Yeah,
I see. So what is does Europe really have? I mean, Finland joined NATO, which is an interesting topic in itself. But does the European people have the will to do anything more in Ukraine, send peacekeepers, fund the war? Because the U.S. is likely to back away. What do you think the European response will be to that?
Yeah, there is a lot of talk in the European Union at the top level in Brussels about doing something with regards to Ukraine. But actually, it's true that they have consumed a huge amount of money, and also they have sent a huge amount of weapons to Ukraine. But what has been the result is that European Union countries are at the moment in financial problems, and because of the sending so many weapons to Ukraine, many of the EU member states their armed forces are increasingly depleted, and if the European Union can do something more, of course, they at the moment at the level of European Commission, they have grandiose plans about rearming European Union countries and make new cooperation proposals, which could end up making European Union as some kind of foreign and security policy player. But it takes extremely long time to create something in the field of military. So if they can, I'm quite skeptical if the European Union can really make a difference in Ukraine. But it's the situation in Ukraine is a double-edged sword for the European Union. On the one hand, is a big opportunity because they can paint a picture of very big threat from the part of Russia, and they want to go towards forming a European Union federation, make a unitary state actually. But on the other hand, what is very threatening for the EU elites is that it's also a big threat if they can't go out of the Ukraine war because of losing faith. They have made all their credibility because they have participated so strongly in the war there. And actually, if they end up losing their war in Ukraine, in my view, that will be the end of the European Union because they lose their credibility, and increasingly many member states will look for independent foreign policies and look for partners outside of the center of Europe.
Well, that brings up a good question. How can Trump and Putin and those in Europe that don't want continuing war, what's the path forward? I mean, you've got Zelensky, and he's supported by elements of the U.S. and in Europe that want the war to continue for the exact reason you said, in that it reduces their power if it stops. So we're in a dangerous place, right? How do you see the way forward? What would be good to happen?
Yeah, we are definitely in a very dangerous phase. So actually, Russia can't back down because it's an existential war for them. But simultaneously, it's kind of existential for European Union as well. It's very positive that Trump has made an effort to launch the negotiation. Even the fact that U.S. and Russian counterparts are meeting each other, it's very, very positive. And somehow Zelensky and EU leaders should be made facing the cold reality that actually the collective West has lost its war in Ukraine, and now what is at stake is the world peace, and we have to make a kind of compromise. And normally, when there is a war, the winner of the war, which is at the moment Russia, it has the most cards at hand.
Well, let's talk about the Russians. Their economy is doing very well because of the war primarily. We put a story out yesterday that even an anti-Putin publication in Moscow, the Bell, put out that the Russians are the happiest in a decade. They're making money, but yes, it's a war economy. But what's the mood of the average guy in the store in Murmansk? Or I don't know if you spend any time in Moscow or St. Petersburg, but what do you feel the Russian people really are thinking? Are they happy? Do they see Putin as a strong leader? What do they think?
I hadn't been to Russia for some years now, so I think it was more than 3 years I hadn't been there. I felt like pretty much nothing had changed there. And to my eyes, Russians are living a normal life. And actually, even Murmansk, which is like a kind of small city in the periphery of Russia, level of infrastructure was very good there. I also spent a little bit time in Moscow, and it's a really modern world megalopolis, which has an extremely high level of infrastructure, and to my eyes, it looks from that perspective, it looks much better than cities in Western Europe. For example, Brussels, where I'm living at the moment. What about what comes to Russian economy? The economic growth last year was 4.1%, which is higher than in the major EU countries, and if I remember correctly, also higher than in the US. The forecast for this year is a little bit lower, 1.3%. But all the time, Western analysts haven't got the realistic. The forecasts have been much more negative than the real outcome finally has been. The really big problem in Russian economy is inflation, and also I noticed that it's not that cheap, even though the level of ruble has been forced to adapt to the new reality of having exportation more difficult, especially towards West.
What about I know there's a lot of sanctions. I've spent time in Moscow years back and other parts of Russia, and Ukraine as well. But what about the stores? Is there product in the stores? The cheeses, the meat, the eggs. I mean, are people having any problems getting what they need to live a normal life, or is it pretty abundant?
I went to different food stores, both in Murmansk and Moscow, totally randomly. I must say that the food stores have everything, and in very abundant manner.
Yeah.
And I would say that the level of quality of many food is really high there. Russian people are proud of having gene manipulated products banned there. I don't want to say what is my opinion about that, but they seem to be very proud of that. And level like the quality of fish restaurants in Murmansk, it's amazing. I couldn't believe that. It's much better than in many parts of Western Europe, even in highly praised culinarist countries.
Thank you for your insights, Sakari. It's extremely interesting, and Americans don't hear this, and that's why we wanted to have you on. But how do people follow you, and how can they stay in touch with you if they want to follow what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm present in many social media. For example, on X, Sakari Linden, Sakerui 2025 is my profile there. I'm also present on Facebook. Yeah,
great. Thank you. I want to have you back down the road. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, take care.
I'm watching my friends gain more and more weight, and then eventually I got to tell you, this is a little dark, but bad diet literally killed my whole crew.
Wow.
Diabetes, a stroke. I mean, all kinds of stuff. It's like, you had a stroke? You're not even 50 years old. You guys got to quit eating this stuff. Your body knows what's what. You're not conscious of this. But that's why people will go to the refrigerator and they'll grab this and that and the other and put together this outrageously elaborate combination of foods. Your body's trying to reach balance. Unbeknownst to us, our bodies are always trying to reach homeostasis. You can't eat all of this stuff and expect to live a long time. And one thing led to another, and I went, forget this. We're going to make our own product. So we partnered with one of the world's top 3 biochemists where nutrition-specific study is concerned. I said, all I want is the best nutritional and immune support product in the world. So we mixed it in yogurt. It's a powder. I got a bag of it here. I keep one on the console all the time, just so I can show people.
Yeah.
And it's a powder. Now, this is not candy. This is hardcore nutrition. And sugar is an enemy. And most people do not know that the reason these bellies are showing up on people all over the place, your body makes fat to store the toxins it can't get rid of. So it just puts them over here. But I can tell you this, you take this for 30 days and then lay off of it for 2 or 3 days, and you'll go, good grief, give me some more. Skin, nails, hair growing back, cut yourself and it heals in half the time.
I'm David Cross, and you may know me from my election integrity work, but I also own U.S. Asset Management, an investment advisory practice. I've been an advisor for nearly 30 years, and one of the questions I get asked most frequently is, do I have enough money relative to other people my age? And while that's an interesting question, it's also the wrong question. The right question is do you have enough money to sustain your lifestyle for the rest of your life? This is a question you should know the answer to. This is what we do. Check us out at us-am.com and look for our big proud American Eagle logo.
We're slogging over Africa. Foot, slogging over Africa. Boot, moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. 7, 6, 11.
Welcome back to the SCIF. I played that poem, Kipling, I believe it is, on his poem about World War I. I had to listen to that for days and days and days, 24/7, being in resistance training in the Air Force to learn how to be a POW. So psychological warfare definitely works, but I thought you'd enjoy that. I want to ask that you support our sponsors and also support our merch. I'm going to go to a site here. This is armedforces.press. And if you go there, you can see the top left there, our merch store. We have a lot of good stuff. If you want some cool stuff to work out in the gym, go to the merch store and check out all the stuff we have, all kind of different designs, some really cool stuff to work out in the gym, all different colors. Check it out, armedforces.press. Get some of our merch, and we would really appreciate it. One of the other things I want to do before we bring Linda Sinkowitz on at the top of the hour is talk about some of the big stories internationally. We're going to stay on this Wisconsin voter fraud story because that is just horrific, and really people don't know what's going on. Even the White House and others are ignoring this election fraud problem. I've noticed across the whole spectrum, Conservative Inc. as well. I mean, we're talking about things that nobody else will talk about, and we're going to continue to do that. And that's why we were attacked, and that's why we need your support to help buy our merch, to help buy your books through us at cdm.press at the bookstore, to support the wellness company for your prescription drugs. You can get all kind of stuff there. Just go on their site, twc.health/CDM, and check out all their different ways they're reimagining healthcare. If you're looking for metals, go to Advisor Metals at cdmmetals.com and support us there. If you're looking to protect your portfolio because we're in for some financial pain, it's coming, and you need to be in a store of value in your 401k or even just with your cash assets. It's going to retain its value in the face of really uncertainty and volatile financial markets. And so support us all there, and we will still be here when you need us to get the word out. So thank you for that. And you can donate. You can sign up for our no ad subscriptions. That's a big one. If you go to cdm.press and top right, subscribe with no ads, you can get all of our content across 13 and growing websites with no advertisements on the digital sites. So that is really cool. It's $10 a month. People love it, or $100 a year, and you just get it done, get it out of the way, and you have access to all of CDM every day, all day long, across the world, with no advertisements on your phone, no pop-ups, etc. So people love that stuff. Again, we're going to have Linda Sinkowitz at the top of the hour from Fight Voter Fraud in Connecticut. We're going to talk about what is happening in Turkey, in the Middle East. Hold on. So we showed a video. In fact, I'm going to play this video and then we'll talk about it real quick.
Göründüğü gibi olan gücünü milletten alan Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. Göründüğü gibi olan gücünü milletten alan Recep Tayyip Erdoğan.
So the push for World War III is happening, whether you want to understand it or not. You need to understand it because your kids are going to be involved in it. This is the Middle East. This story is on CDM.press. Turkey moving forces into Syria. So the new government in Syria was installed by Turkish special forces. We interviewed Eric Prince recently. He said drones and Turkish SAF were the ones that installed the Golani, who was the former Al Qaeda member who got a haircut, put on a suit, changed his name, and now he's the leader of Syria, still supported by Turkey. Israel doesn't like this because Turkey is really concerned about its border areas in Syria into the Middle East. It's the old Ottoman Empire, and the situation with the Kurds, which they looks like they've wrapped that up, and the PKK and all of that have been I guess destabilized and moved to a position where they don't have the power, terrorist type actions against the Turkish government. But Israel's really concerned about this. And if you go to another article on CDM, you can see let me bring that up. Here's Turkey and Syria. But in the middle of that green area is where Turkey is looking to start building, controlling air bases in Syria. Now, Israel has had supremacy of the skies. I'm blanking on the term, but air supremacy for some time. I'm an old Air Force Academy guy. I should know this. But so Israel has supremacy in the air over Syria, but they are really concerned about that being degraded as Turkey moves assets and air assets into Syria. So we're expecting possibly a major conflict here. There was I think Netanyahu said that the conflict between Turkey and Israel is almost certain. I mean, that is at least in a confrontational sense, maybe even militarily. And then where would that bring the United States? Turkey is part of NATO. So all of this is extremely concerning. But we're going to stay on this story and see where the Turkish, I think the M4 air base is where they're going, or T4 in Syria, near Homs. That's in the central Syrian area. And that's where Turkish forces are moving their assets into. Huge story, and we're going to stay on top of it. The next story I want to talk about is more war, unfortunately. But if you go to CDM.press, again, we're really covering all these different conflicts, along with our military site, armedforces.press, and our Eastern European site, sarizm.com, TSARIZM.com. But we are covering all this war focus more than any other outlets that I've seen, in a very detailed, comprehensive way, and in a way that you can understand what's happening. So we talked about the Middle East with Syria and Israel and Turkey. You've got the Houthis down in Yemen, which are fighting the U.S. The U.S. is moving massive troops and aircraft and naval infrastructure into the Middle East to confront the Houthis, which are a proxy army for Iran. So you've got Iran running Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and Gaza is pretty much being taken care of by the Israelis. Hezbollah in Lebanon has been weakened. But you have the Houthis, which the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy are attacking strongly as we speak. All of this is happening under the backdrop of a global war. There's a great article on the fourth turning I read yesterday, which every 80, 90 years, you have this massive conflict and destabilization and death in the world, from the Civil War in the U.S. to World War II, 80 years later, almost to the day. And so all of this is happening in that backdrop. And then you've got to talk about Ukraine also, where they have said that they are going to deploy a doomsday weapon if Russia, wins the war. So you've got Ukraine saying, or this is a former Ukrainian official who said he's tight with Zelensky and the gang, and that they are going to attack nuclear infrastructure in Europe and in Russia and in Ukraine if they lose the war. And that would, it's kind of a mutually assured destruction. Well, if you're going to defeat us, we're going to destroy everything with nuclear radiation all over Europe. So, the Chernobyl was a very small leak, and it really impacted Europe in a big way. Imagine massive leaks across multiple nuclear power plants in Ukraine and Russia, and then you can see the concern that everybody has. So we're going to stay on this story. And Ukraine is continuing to target Russian energy infrastructure. The ceasefire agreement between Zelensky, Russia, and Trump was that energy infrastructure would be avoided along with other civilian infrastructure, and that is not happening. Russia is saying, there's an article, you can see it right there on CDM. Let me just scroll down. that Russia is saying that they, where does it say? The Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said there's been no response from Washington to the attacks by the Ukrainian army on Russian energy facilities. And so far, there's been no reaction to such actions by the Kiev regime. And then you have the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov saying that the list of violations have been handed over to U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Secretary of State Rubio, and Russia's representatives in the UN and OSCE, so that in their work, they would present concrete facts demonstrating what the word of the Ukrainian authorities is worth. Again, extremely concerning. Someone wants World War III. It's Europe. It's elements in the U.S. It is the Zelensky regime. And, Russia obviously wants to take as much territory as they can before the ceasefire is over. So it's really up to Trump and the White House and his, skill sets in the art of the deal to make sure we don't go into a massive, massive war all around the world. A lot of interesting comments. Amy Williams and Murph, some of our two greatest comments. Murph says, how stupid are we that voter ID passed, but the judge loses? I mean, obviously manipulated. And Amy says, maybe Trump made a deal to lay off the election fraud if he was allowed to win. All of these really good points. We're going to explore all these. We're not giving up on the election fraud issue. It's massive and it needs to be dealt with. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with Linda Sinkowitz from Connecticut. I think you'll really enjoy her. And then in the second hour, we have Gawain Towler from the UK, former Reform and Brexit comms director. I always love Gawain. He's a contributor to CDM.press. His stuff is on there all the time. You can Google him and really enjoy the articles. Very witty, very insightful. And we'll be right back after this break.
Ready?
Ready. So we're out in the field in South Dakota shooting pheasants, and we're coming out here to a Milo field you can see behind us, and I was throwing in an ALP. Someone else was using a tobacco product, and then somebody, and I'm not going to name names, pulled that out in public at a hunt. And so that's obviously yesterday. What we have here, ALP, is tomorrow, and we're going to make that official by symbolically ending the long reign of this product. Willie Robertson happened to be hunting with us. We don't have a mechanical thrower, but we do have a former U.S. Senator Rick Santorum of Pennsylvania. With an arm. Willie's got a 12 gauge. I've got my trusty 20, and we're going to see what we can do to usher out the Zen era. Yes! So, I should say, alppouch.com, for sale now, alppouch.com, usher in tomorrow a brand new world of nicotine pouches, the American Lip Pillow, on sale now. Warning! This product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive.
I'm David Cross, and you may know me from my election integrity work, but I also own U.S. Asset Management, an investment advisory practice. I've been an advisor for nearly 30 years, and one of the questions I get asked most frequently is, do I have enough money relative to other people my age? And while that's an interesting question, it's also the wrong question. The right question is do you have enough money to sustain your lifestyle for the rest of your life? This is a question you should know the answer to. This is what we do. Check us out at us-am.com and look for our big, proud American Eagle logo.
Welcome back to the SCIF. I'm going to bring in Linda Sinkowitz now. We've had Linda on the program many times. Linda, thank you for coming on. And what is going on in Connecticut, and what are you working on at Fight Voter Fraud?
Oh, fight voter fraud. We are working on so many different things, and not just here in Connecticut. I mean, Connecticut has massive, massive issues.
Yeah, no.
You know, our state is actually going the opposite direction of all the other states, which is absolutely insane. I mean, we've been trying to clean the voter roll, but nobody seems to want to remove the people that we prove that don't even live here or died. And there is absolutely nothing being done by our Secretary of State's office. But oh, wait a minute. Wasn't she the one during the debate to become Secretary of State? She actually said fraud was acceptable.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Go
mean, it's
figure.
just like, but yes, we are working on so many different things right now. What we're working on is we are training people across the country to do the same type of work we'd been doing.
Mhm.
We're going to be in different areas. We are focusing on Florida, by the way, because
They
Florida, you
have
guys,
massive problems in Florida. Yeah, tell people what voter fraud is. They may not know you. They may not have heard of you. How did this get started? Who are you?
oh,
What do you do?
okay. So I'm Linda Sinkowitz. I am the founder and CEO of Fight Voter Fraud. We've actually been around for 6 years, over 6 years. We were very quiet up until about a year ago. And the way that I started Fight Voter Fraud is I had run for state rep here in Middletown, Connecticut. And in 2018 is when I figured out what they were doing. And I had 6 inches of hard evidence, and I contacted our chief state's attorney's office, and they told me they don't have the resources, go to the SEEC, which is the State Election Enforcement here in Connecticut, which is definitely a misnomer because they don't enforce it at all. What happens with them is they'll get the information, they'll hang on to it for a year, and if it's not looked into in a year, they just drop it. So we've consistently seen that happen, although I do hold the record for the most amount of complaints, and that's with me not even sending a complaint in the last 3.5 years.
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. So at that time, I had someone tell me that it was a federal election and I should contact the FBI, which I did. And I was supposed to meet them 8 days before the election and turn over 6 inches of hard evidence. I got a phone call that morning at 7 a.m. telling me they couldn't meet with me. And I was like, well, do we need to change the time or the location? And they were, no, it'll look like we're interfering with an election. And as I tell people, that is the last time I cried over this. I spent 1.5 years knocking on doors. I mean, in the middle of winter, in the summertime, and to know because of what I had that there was no way I was going to win because of the fraudulent stuff that I had come up with. But actually, it's a good thing because had I known that within 90 days of an election, the feds can't get involved, I never would have started Fight Voter Fraud.
Well, there you
So,
go. There's a purpose
yeah,
for everything, right?
everything happens for a reason. And Lord knows I never thought, just the fact that it's been 6 years of all the stuff that we've done. And we have learned so much and we have been able to help out so many different people across the country. So when we first started, we were just doing the deep dives on people with the absentee ballots. The absentee ballots, I would say, accounts for 85% of the fraud across the country. That's it.
Yeah.
It all happens before the election.
We just
There
had
are
Dan Eastman on. We just had Dan Eastman in Wisconsin on saying the same thing. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's you'll get some people at the voting site that day, but it's all beforehand. And it all goes back to the voter rolls themselves. And everybody, all your friends that know somebody that's in Connecticut, the registrar of voters, and oh, ours is wonderful. No, I'm sorry. I can't tell you in Connecticut that 20% are doing their jobs, the other 80% are not. And we have facts and documentation to also back that up.
We're saying also that even the certification of the elections is at risk because of these people don't even have the training. They're not doing what they should do, that they're not, official essentially. Am I right?
Right. So here in Connecticut, because we had been sending so much information on deceased voters, the double registered, and we're letting them know with the evidence that these people need to be removed. And we know they have to do their due diligence on this. And it kind of hit me about 6-7 months ago that, wait a minute, I have spent over $50,000 just mailing the information and the books and the documentation to the 169 towns here in Connecticut. And why are they not doing their job? So on July 8th, I requested from the Secretary of State, the head of elections, and I also emailed the head of the Democrats and the head of the Republicans because we're transparent. And I asked for, can you please send me a list of all the registrars here in Connecticut and when they were hired and when they were certified and their recertification hours? A month later, I get sent a file of garbage, of absolute garbage that the Secretary of State's office had sent me as far as who was certified and who wasn't.
They
And
probably were
missing.
laughing when they put that together, right? I mean, we're going to send her this pile of garbage and see what she says.
Well, the funny thing is that they kept telling me that, oh, it's going to take us a little bit. Well, I already knew they were telling registrars, you need to get certified. You need to get certified. Because the amount that we have found that were certified from July through mid-August was a number of them. So what we ended up finding was that I had to send to 169 towns. We sent a certified mail return receipt to whether a mayor or selectman, because I wanted people to be aware there's a problem. And we asked those same questions. The certification of your registrars, both the Democrat and the Republican, their hours of certification to maintain it, and actually when they were installed. And we asked one other thing, a very simple one sheet, the ED 632, which is them saying that they've done their canvassing. And both of them have to sign off, and it has to be done before August 30th. We actually scanned in all the stuff that was sent to us and every email that I had with the towns and everybody else. They had no clue as to what they were doing. We got sent things that were printed on top of other things that were printed, and it was just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
So what we did was we put together a book, and you can go online and look at it. It was our expose on our registrar of voters. First of all, they have to be certified within 2 years. They have to go through a class, 8 classes, and they take a 2-hour test. Multiple choice and yes or no. 50 questions. That's it. They only have to score a 70. So, I mean, the bar is so low you trip over it.
Yeah.
And get this, it's open book.
Wow.
And a large majority of the registrar of voters here in the state of Connecticut were not certified. And we have a number of people whose towns who legally couldn't run the election because they're not certified after 2 years. And then we have a Secretary of State here in Connecticut that's not doing her job by bringing them forward to, oh, this is funny, to the SEEC for, reprimanding them to get their certification. She's not doing their job. They're not doing their job. They have no clue as to what an ED 632 is. And like I said, we're just completely transparent with this. We did our 3rd revision, and I actually had a couple of towns that sent me the stuff just recently. And this is what we worked on back like August, September.
Yeah, I remember we did that event in Westport together, and you were talking about all this.
Yeah, so we have our 3rd version of it, and I'm not doing it anymore. I mean, I really don't care what they send me anymore because they're not complying. And then another issue, you talk about the certification. Well, we ordered the voter rolls here in Connecticut on December 30th. We ended up getting the voter rolls the same day because, we pay $300 and then they send them within a couple of hours. And what we found was they gave us the December 18th voter rolls, which, all right, so there's, almost 2 weeks behind. And when we did our analysis, 26% of the votes in the towns were missing. Torrington never reported anything. Yet, on December 17th, it's a requirement of the federal government that every state send their certified numbers to Congress by December 17th. So my question is, how do you certify numbers when you're missing 26% of the votes?
So just for our audience sake, after the election was held, the votes were allegedly sent to the state to report numbers to the world about the results of the election. And you're saying a huge chunk of those was never even reported.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct.
Wow.
So we also found there's a number of states that hadn't put their stuff in between January and February because we're getting all the voter rolls with something else that we're working on. So for Connecticut, what we then did was on February 8th, I believe it was. No, February 2nd, excuse me. February 2nd, I sent in for the newest voter rolls, but I actually said, would you mind giving me the 2024 votes that are supposed to be included since the last time they were missing, up to 26%. Remember how I told you it's usually within 2 hours to 24 hours we get it?
Yeah.
2.5 weeks later, after my following up, they said, well, we're looking for someone who can send it to you.
Wow.
And they were still missing 2.83%, about 43,000 votes were still not included. So my question is to the other people in other states, are your stuff actually certified? Because we know the numbers that are sent to the feds from Connecticut and the numbers that are actually on the voter rolls absolutely never match. They're supposed to match, but they never match. So that's a huge problem. You got someone certifying something that is false. You have a Secretary of State signing off on numbers that she has nothing to back it up as far as, the hard evidence of these registrars or election officials sending it into the central system.
Wow.
And it's
So
happening in a lot of places.
has there been any response from the official channels as when you brought this up? I mean, or they just ignore you?
They ignore me.
Yeah.
They absolutely ignore everything, but we're working on something so that it's not going to be ignored in the near future. We're giving them enough time, and it's just like, please do your job. And I've also have been, the brunt of people complaining about me talking about their registrars. I did have one town committee that asked me to leave at a meeting.
It's a
Well,
badge
they
of honor.
asked me how their registrar was doing, and I don't know if I can say this on air, but I told them they suck.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the worst in the state, and they're not doing what we're giving them all the information, and they're not removing the dead people from the voter rolls, and the people are still active. They're not following any of the laws. So I was asked to leave.
Well,
And those
when
were
you
those are from friendlies, by the way.
Really?
It's just like, oh
Well,
well.
when you have your response to that you're talking about, let us know. We'll have you back on to talk about what you're doing. But where else? What else you got going on? We've got a couple more minutes.
Okay, so
Talk
we
about
are
Florida.
I was just gonna say, we are working in Florida. We've been working in Florida for a while. And what we just recently did a couple of weeks ago is we pulled out all our evidence on the double voters for Florida. And I personally am doing the final review to make sure we have 100% of the evidence that we need to bring it forward to the feds. And a couple of things that I am noticing, and I have verified with a number of people in Florida, where it's like, you didn't know that? Vote history is being manipulated.
Yes.
I mean, it is so evident that they are changing the data, like especially if someone had double voted or if they were a dead person all of a
They're
sudden.
changing it prior to the election, like to create a new voter, and then changing it back before the election, so that it's fascinating.
Well, they're doing that, and that's another thing I've noticed is in Florida, a lot of the registration dates are after people had been there for years and had been voting. All of a sudden, they're now registered in June of 2023, and it's the same person. And it's not where it was a carryover from where they voted before. It was supposed to be there. The other thing I'm noticing is that when they finally do put the Florida voters on the inactive list, the ones that I've been targeting, because we got about 300 double voters that we're, 98% sure of right now. We just want to make sure it's 100% sure.
Right.
Once they're put on the inactive list, it appears that if they double voted in 2018 or 2020, all of a sudden that vote history is gone. It just shows they only voted up into 2016.
This is algorithmic, right? I mean, this is computer manipulation of the rolls, essentially.
Well, I don't know. One of the things is your VR systems. VR systems is the system in Florida. They're also in 3 other states.
Yeah,
They have to retain the information under the Patriot Act for 7 years.
Yeah.
Your election officials will tell you, oh, we only have to go back 22 months. Well, technically, yeah, they're right on, holding the absentee ballots that had come in and where they hold them. But VR systems, it is 7 years.
Well, they're the group that also has computer problems on every election so that things go down. I mean, it's like clockwork. It's funny.
Yes. Well, I do know there is a company out there that people are going to be hearing about that is going to be incredible in helping clean voter rolls across the country because of the system that they have that hasn't been replicated by anybody. It's being kept under wraps for just a little bit longer. So there is going to be a company that can do the job. I have people who say, well, is it like the ERIC system? No, because this actually works.
Cool.
So we do have hope with that. We're working in multiple states right now. We have some legislation we're helping push through in Texas. It looks like it'll have a hearing next week, which is incredible. Our first foray into getting a bill passed. And don't even bother asking me why we're not doing it in Connecticut. Connecticut, they've got to have, the feds have got to come into Connecticut, which I am really hoping happens because of the violation of the NVRA, the National Voter Registration Act. Connecticut, which should be the poster child for it. And I wouldn't be saying it unless I had all the hard evidence to back it up, and we got it. So,
well, Connecticut's the poster child for a lot of things, including Marxist infiltration and a whole bunch of other problems. But thank goodness for you there. I want to have you back down the road, Linda, but how do people follow you? Where can they help you? I guess is the main question.
Well, they can go to our website, fightvoterfraud.org. If people want to reach out to me, it's Linda, Linda, at fightvoterfraud.org. And I'm actually, just before I came on, we recorded my first weekly program called Sinkowitz. That's going to be on a TV network out there, and we'll be letting people know more about that. So I'm excited that I'm going to be able to bring up information on a weekly basis on election without having, to be just a guest on somebody's program, which I love your show, Todd. Todd has just been phenomenal in getting information out there, and you're great. Whenever I have a question, you immediately respond to me, and you have been so helpful in getting me to the right people. So I am very grateful for you, Todd. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We've done an event or two in Connecticut, and we have the Connecticut Sentinel there, and we'll do something more in the future, Linda. But thank you. I've got to run to the next guest, but to go to a break. But we'll have you back. Take care, Linda.
Okay. Bye-bye.
The bird flu is circulating. We're getting more and more press, more fear mongering, more warnings about this. First, let's start with that. What say you on?
Well, what I say is it specifically is not circulating. It's in animals. There's one human, maybe two transmissions, no human-to-human transmission. And stand by, everybody. If there is some sort of sudden human-to-human transmission, you should immediately be suspicious that gain of function was involved with that. Just the fact that they're taking an animal virus and going nuts on it in the press and talking about it all the time, that to me leads me to believe that they have concerns that somebody is doing something with that virus, because this would not happen naturally, in my opinion.
Our world is changing rapidly. Many crucial systems we depend upon are collapsing. And the most important system that is failing is the food supply.
Mr. President, this Council is more than aware of the multiple challenges and threats the world is facing today. But the threat of famine, people starving slowly to death, must be a red line.
These food prices are going to keep going up and up, and they're going to keep feeding excuse after excuse, narrative after narrative.
Yeah,
so you're going to have to get off that treadmill and start getting more autonomous with your own food growing.
You want to make sure that you can eat, because frankly, food is the biggest issue as we are going through these transitions.
But amidst the chaos, there is a path to resilience. Marjorie Wildcraft is the female leader of the survival and preparedness movement. Marjorie has taught millions of people how to grow an abundance of food in a grid-down situation, even if you have no experience, are older, or out of shape.
I've spent decades finding the fastest, easiest, and funnest ways for the average person to be able to grow a lot of food. I've created a step-by-step process that's so simple that even kids to elders have been using it in order to grow a lot of their own food. And you can too, even if you have no experience, you're older, or you're out of shape.
Growing your own food is like printing your own money. Get started today.
Welcome back to the SCIF. I want to just highlight cdmmetals.com, cdmmetals.com for our audio audience. There is some pain coming in the financial markets. I'm telling you, I was on the street for 20 years. All kind of asset classes are overvalued. There's going to be a whole restructuring of our financial economy. There's going to be wars, and there's going to be volatility in the markets. Make sure you're protected with precious metals for your work of your life in your 401k or IRA that you can roll it to, or just in your cash assets. Make sure you're protected with precious metals. Go to cdmmetals.com, fill out the form, and Ira Bershatsky's team will get back with you and have an easy discussion. We've checked him out. He's a patriot. He has a regulatory background. We checked out his bankers. We've checked out his IRA custodians. We can recommend him highly. So cdmmetals.com. And by the way, cdm.press, put us in your daily scan Monday, morning, noon, and night. Check us a few times a day. We're updating the site constantly. It's got content you're not going to find anywhere else. It's the primer for this show. All of our reporting from all over the world. These are reporters all over the world that send us stuff all night long and in the morning and throughout the day. You're going to get stuff early. You're going to get it before others. And it's not just reading Telegram. It's actual people on the ground like Sakari Linden we just had, who was in Murmansk in Russia at a conference. You're not going to find that anywhere else, I guarantee you. So put us in your daily scan morning, noon, and night, cdm.press. Best thing you can do. We're also on podcasts for this show, all of our shows at CDTV or any podcast channel. Just go to cdm.press, CDTV at the top. You can see all our different show offerings, which we're expanding as we go. One of our fantastic contributors is Gawain Towler. He was the comms guy for Nigel Farage in Brexit and in Reform. Extremely connected, extremely knowledgeable on Europe and the UK and what's going on, and I value his insight. And he's got a hell of a wit too, which I love. You know, I was dealing with him, and I had an issue because I said, you know, Gawain, I don't understand all this slang you're using in your emails. And he's like, oh, really? We call it English. So he's a great guy. I think you'll enjoy it. I sat down with him right before the show, and I'm just going to run this interview and enjoy. Well, we are honored to have with us a good friend of the show, Gawain Towler, who was the former comms guy at Brexit and also Reform. Gawain, thank you for taking time, I know, out of your very busy schedule.
Good to be back with you, Tom.
So first, let me ask you, Katie Hopkins is having a grand old time making videos about Reform. So what is going on inside the party right now?
You've got to remember that as the party, we've gone from a corner shop to Walmart in 8 months.
Yeah.
And as you do that, the systems, the personnel, all sorts of other things. It said like a minor league team, somebody sometimes breaks it into the major league. The fans are the same, the name's the same, the desire's the same, but there's nobody on the pitch who was there 2 seasons ago. There's nobody in the admin staff that was there 2 seasons ago. And that's the process we're going through. We've gone from no branches, no structure, or a bunch of volunteers working their socks off for very little reward to a professional organization. And as that process goes forward, noses get put out of joint, egos gets dented, vanity is not assuaged. I myself am an example of professionalization in that I was obviously a roadblock to democratization and professionalization of the party, which is why I had to go. The difference is some people, I'm sad to say, think that they're more important than the cause.
So that sounds
that doesn't mean I don't believe in it.
It sounds very similar to some of the MAGA groups in the U.S. The same process that's been going on for several years now. But what do the chances look like for reform going forward? I mean, are they the only option essentially?
I think so. Reform under Farage are the only machine that could possibly break the old duopoly of Labour and Conservatives. They are tired. They are thought-free. And they seem to just be bobbing along. Even despite all this trouble we've had today, the Tories are up 1, we're up 1, Labour's down 2. Now, and it looks like there's 3 parties of about the same size right now. But if you fold forward 3-4 years, 4 more years of disastrous economic policies and disastrous climate policies are going to impoverish the country. 4 more years of 4, 5, 6, 7, 800,000 people turning up on our shores. The mood is hardening. And the Conservative Party that brought in the net zero agenda, the Conservative Party that brought in the DEI world over the last 14 years, cannot and do not have the answers and won't be trusted. And as the country, by and large, is centre-right in its gut, every now and then it votes Labour because the centre-right have been so god-awful. And that is what has happened. But it doesn't, it's not an easy fit as a country, this sort of centre-left socialist-y type operation. So does reform have a chance? Yeah. Has reform got to take that chance? 100%. Another 4 years of this shower driving us into the ground, importing millions of people, changing our culture, silencing our voices. This won't be the UK anymore. So
well, that was exactly my question. Is it too late?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not too late. But I think in 10 years' time, it may well be.
Yeah.
And therefore, we cannot fluff this chance. The metaphor of carrying the Ming vase. The Ming vase, we cannot drop. And the Ming vase is the hopes of millions of our fellow citizens that we can turn this round, that we can change the world. What has always been very interesting about the UK, its revolutions are always conservative. The Peasants' Revolt back in 1382, they didn't want a brave new world. They weren't French about things. They wanted their old world back, thank you very much, and get off with give us back our liberties. And if you look at the Pilgrimage of Grace, you look at the Prayer Book Rebellion, and Brexit is an example, the Six Acts, the Charters. This is all about getting our liberties back. It's not about creating a brave new world. We don't want perfection. We're quite comfortable in our slightly muddled through world. We just don't like the government nicking our stuff from us.
It's kind of a reverse Bolshevik revolution, it seems.
Yes, absolutely. And Brexit was a classic case in point. It didn't posit that the world would be perfect. It's just we didn't want to be doing it like that. Thank you very much. Stop taking our freedoms away. Stop taking our liberties away. There are some links to MAGA America, but not as many as some people think. Yes, Farage is a friend of Trump. Absolutely. But that doesn't mean there's a slavish agreement with every single thing he does. And in a month's time, we've got the council elections. It's possible that Reform will win a couple of these councils, and these are about 800,000 population spaces, so they're quite large zones.
Yeah.
And I think we would definitely be looking at introducing a sort of mini local level Doge type thing to go through every single budget line and find out what on earth's been done with our money. We have the same opacity that America's had with USAID and various other things. So we expect to find quite a lot of cash hidden behind their sofa that we can then reapply or reduce taxes, one of the two. Reapply more effectively to provide better services, or reduce taxes, or a bit of both. But so we have these opportunities between now and 29 to actually prove ourselves. Okay, we quite like the cut of their jib. They seem to be decent sorts. We like their passion. We like their love of country. Can they actually do anything? Are they competent? Is a perfectly reasonable question. And we have to prove ourselves, not just to be thinking the right things, but being able to do the right things too.
So what's the process? Is a lot of confusion about how this may go forward with a new election or not, or what do you see happening, I guess is the question.
The government has such a majority that there's no way we're going to go early. The government is not going to fall. Doesn't matter what happens. Hell would freeze over and that government still be in power until 2029 or 28 if they go a bit earlier. But there's nobody's going to force them into it. Yeah. You might, through embarrassment and shame, we might lose our prime minister, but they will just be replaced by another Labour minister. So, like the Tories changed their leaders like they changed their socks, but it didn't require an election. So we have to accept that. Within our constitution, and of course, it's going to be harder for us. If you look at what Reform's trying to do, we don't have a chance of Trump won. We need to learn now, while not in office, not to make the mistakes of Trump won, and we don't have the constitutional device of the executive order. So we are going to be having to wading through the treacly swamp from day one if we get into a position of power. And that is the judiciary. That is the House of your Senate, our House of Lords. There isn't. There are 800 of them, and there's not a single Reform member. Wow. And there won't be.
So what are you built? Are you
Trump against a 100% Democrat Senate?
Yeah. It wouldn't work here. I mean, it's a different power structure in the House of Lords, though, right?
Yeah, but they do have the power to slow things down. A Farage-led government might find itself 2 years in and not a single piece of legislation has been enacted because of the ability of the courts and the House of Lords and other structures to block and delay and push back. So you may find yourself in a horrible constitutional crisis. Come 2030.
So what are you building? Are you building like we did in the U.S. The structure, the infrastructure, the people, the training people?
That is certainly happening, but noses are being put out of joint. And that's the nature of the beast. I'm sad to say. I wish it were not the case. Many of these people who are hurt are people I regard as close personal friends. I've known them for years. And they feel they're being superseded and overrun. They are, to a certain extent. And it's
that happened in the U.S. too. I mean, I hear from people that wanted to be in the Trump administration that were in the first one that just didn't get in because I think they're bringing in a lot of younger people that they can train up. But
you've got to have this. There's a sort of balance between loyalty and competence.
Yes.
Before 2024, the general election, we majored on massive loyalty. I can't pretend we majored on massive competence. The fact is we had a team of about 6 at the center that did the election campaign, got 4.1 million votes, 14% of it, and 5 members of parliament elected. That was an astonishing achievement. But we don't want 5 people elected. We want 360 elected.
Right.
And that is a massive, massive ask. And you do need competence. But if you buy in competence when the chips are down, are they loyal?
Ah, interesting.
That is the danger. If they're mercenaries, well, somebody else might pay them more.
There's a lot of that going around in MAGA too, in the U.S.
But that is the problem. They may have been not particularly brilliant. They may have been not particularly competent, but they would drive off a cliff and climb up the cliff afterwards and say, right, next.
Yeah, for sure.
And that is worth an awful lot, even if they're not particularly brilliant.
This is true.
And there are a lot of very good people. They may not have political science degrees and all the rest of it, but really good people. I do think, however, the retail offer we're going to make, both in policy terms and personnel terms when it comes to the next election, will be the best the country has seen for well over 100 years. Because the diversity of people and their background and experience is from all walks of life, not just the narrow Westminster, Whitehall, inside the loop experience that most political people have today.
Yeah.
So
what about immigration? Is there anything you can do in the next several years to slow or stop or impede?
Nothing.
No.
We're not in power. We can't do anything.
Yeah.
All we can do is highlight the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that, well, as you know, I wrote a piece for you about the hardening of opinion in the UK, and that is certainly taking place. Tomorrow I'm in this old city of Durham. On Monday, I was at Chesterfield, where George Stephenson came from. On Saturday, I'm going to Worcester, where Elgar came from, talking to groups of 100, 200 people. And I'm seeing the hardening. It is setting before our eyes and before my very eyes, this hardening of attitudes. And 4 more years of, as I say, 500,000 a year in a country of 70 million, that's 2 million. That's, what, 8% just in 2 years or 4 years?
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, the fact is that many migrant groups, particularly those who are more antithetical to our culture, breed. They produce children at a far greater rate. The replacement rate is significant. And so people are getting increasingly concerned for the future of their country, concerned for the future of their culture. I wouldn't be at all surprised that Labour goes into the next election saying they're going to deport 1 million people. And that'll be the lefties.
Yeah, just trying to get power or stay in power.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would suggest that my lot might be putting a program together and saying 4 million or more. Now, how on earth you do that under the current constitution and legalities and being decent and I mean, to a certain extent, in order to do that, which many people on the right would like us to do, we have to tear up our very notion of fair play, of the common law, of everything we believe to be good about ourselves. And I think that will be a very hard. I hear people saying that on Twitter, attacking me for not being particularly hardcore on this right now. I've got a mixed race cousin. I'd deport her. What?
Yeah. Yeah.
What? That's not the England I love. That's not our culture. And so a lot of these people who are sort of claiming this rather American sense of Anglo-Saxon are talking in language that is, I can't go there, and I will not go there. But if you change the incentive structure for migration, then I wouldn't be at all surprised if we have a lot of people leaving of their own accord.
Well, it's happening here with self-deportation. Yeah.
You call it, use the phrase you want to use. Like self-deportation is leaving. It's just leaving. Because if you change the incentive structure, if you say, right, you have to speak English within 6 months or you can't stay. For one, including women. Why should they get a buy? Including the Scots. No, that's not true. But if you do that, if you say no housing, no benefits, no welfare, no, you don't get the education if you've arrived here illegally, unless you, then suddenly the purpose of coming here is gone.
So what about the tyranny that people are seeing on social media in, police coming to the house because you criticized your schoolmaster or
Absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Basically, we took East Coast America and made it so much worse.
Well, both coasts is California too, but
yeah, but it came out of these dodgy little East Coast American universities.
That's true.
What was I read the other day? Climate change started when Columbus's boat landed in Hispaniola. From some, by the way, British mixed race professor working in a small university in America.
Indigenous history is a thing, that's for sure here.
Absolutely bats. But we have inherited it and made it our own. We've put golden knobs on it and wrapped it in velvet. It is disastrous. But again, the country's waking up to it and they don't like it at all. We are fair-minded and this isn't. I wrote an article for the Daily Express yesterday about discovering that in the Department of Work and Pensions, which is the one that hands out welfare, you have the classic tick box. If you want to get a senior role internally, you've got a tick box through LGBTQ, whatever, color, religion, and socio and economic background. And the more ticks you get, the more chance you have of getting a senior position. Be damned your ability to do the job.
Sounds familiar.
This sort of thing is really starting to wind people up. People are seeing it everywhere. And I think and this is why I think Reform have a very good chance, because again, who brought this DEI rubbish in? The Tories. It wasn't Labour.
Well, wait till your aircraft start crashing and with the all-female crew.
That was a bit weird. What, for a week or two, every other plane seemed to drop out the sky in America. What was all that about?
Let me switch gears. What about economics? What about tariffs? Because I've got another show here in about 10 minutes. But
Look, there's a deep amount of dishonesty on this side of the pond, both in Europe and the UK. We've been whacking tariffs on American products for decades. We just have. We have a horrible tariff regime. And suddenly America turns around and says, hey, quid pro quo. Oh, no, how dare you? You want to end the world. I do think America's been daft about certain things. I think Trump's foreign policy in certain areas like Canada, Greenland, are frankly absurd. And the damage that Trump's Canadian escapade has done to the centre-right in Canada is fatal. They are going to elect somebody worse than Trudeau because of that. And I can't understand who at state and who is even slightly, it's just madness and stupid on the part of the Americans when it comes to Canada. And I'm appalled by it. I mean, who the hell do they think they are, frankly?
Well, how do you answer? I mean, I hear you, and that's everywhere. We're hearing that a lot. But how do you answer the Chinese infiltration into Canada, the fentanyl?
You encourage the Canadians. You encourage a decent right-wing Canadian government to do something about it themselves, and you've just destroyed that chance. Well done. You don't just turn up there and say you're ours. It's just outrageous.
I happen to think it's all negotiation, art of the deal stuff, but
maybe so, but you're going to be doing a deal with Mark Carney, not with Pierre Poilievre. Well done.
Yeah.
In the end, we might have to burn. They might have to burn the White House down again. You rotten stinkers. 12, here we come. But that's ridiculous. But no, on the greater scheme of things, basically, as I see it, America looks at the world. It's brought this horrible thing called reality back into politics. International politics, which is a bizarre concept because everybody's trying to pretend it doesn't exist for such a long time. And it's power and money.
You mean Europe's not going to deploy hundreds of thousands of troops to Ukraine, which they don't have? That kind of reality?
Funny that. And anyhow, they want that. Nobody in Britain's going to join up to fight for somebody who calls them a racist bigot. Because it's the white working class that's going to expect to wear green and die.
Exactly. Same here.
And but the tariffs It's going to be interesting. Of course, Britain is now looking at putting tariffs on other countries because we're terrified now of countries who can't trade with America because of the tariffs are going to be dumping their cheap products on us. This is not necessarily a good thing, by the way. So it's all a bit of a, I don't know what's going to happen. I do think the art of the deal, but America clearly has looked at the world, or the Trump administration has looked at the world over the last 4 years and said, right, who's the big scary? Ooh, the big scary is China.
Yeah.
China.
Gaza,
little local difficulty, hit the blighters and get them to shut up, sort it out.
Yeah.
Ukraine, regional difficulty, Europe's problem.
Agreed.
China's the globe's problem. And to me, I feel that to Washington, both the Ukraine and Gaza are irritants. But they're not going to change the world, whereas China will. And so it is understandable that its focus spins on China rather than it just wants them to stop killing each other and settle down to some form of peace. Not ideal, not perfect for the people, the combatants, not the Ukrainians who frankly, nobody's perfect in this world, but the Ukrainians are less imperfect than the Russians, let's be honest. They didn't invade Russia. And that's just the basic bottom line. But, and I think one of the interesting things over Ukraine was that one of the very first acts of the Trump White House was to put sanctions on any ship carrying Russian oil anywhere in the world. And suddenly 20% of the large bulk oil carriers parked instantly. This wasn't pro-Russia. This wasn't pro-Putin. Absolutely no way. But people didn't seem to notice that.
Well, they don't want to notice that because that goes against the narrative. Yeah.
He's shook things up. Let's pray that in 6 months' time there is proper peace there, or more quickly. I really hope so.
Is the UK helping in that process or harming that process?
UK's irrelevant in that process.
Really, because I think they are one of the power centers that are trying to keep it going. That's just my opinion.
I don't think they're trying to keep the war going, but they don't like Trump, and so therefore anything Trump does is wrong. And I don't think they seem to understand the real politic of it. Are they? But I really don't think they matter. What are we going to do? Send our one division? We get wiped out in a week, and that'd be it.
Well, what about? I mean, the UK is continuing to provide intelligence, and for long range strikes in Russia. I mean, I'm concerned about a bigger conflict in the Middle East and in Europe. I think that's what some people want, in your government and mine, actually.
I don't think our government wants a bigger conflict. We just know we're not capable of it.
Yeah.
We're just not capable of it. We don't understand what the hell's going on with the Chagos. Nobody understands what the Tory government, the Labour government's doing over the Chagos Islands. It's baffling to us. We cannot see any positive. If I was American, I'd let the UK pay vast sums of money for somebody to take our own property off us, and then go to the Mauritius and say, we'll buy it for half the price. Thanks. So Mauritius gets 2 paydays. You get the thing, and we get nothing. But that sounds the level of UK diplomatic intelligence at present. It is terrifying how, when I look at how we're doing or how we're behaving around the world, it's just.
Last question: the sex scandal, with the Asian gangs. Starmer was, I think, last time we talked, he was, impacted by that. That seems to have gone away, at least in the U.S. press. What about in the UK?
Yeah, Musk's other things to worry about.
Yeah.
Basically. There are certain things, but the fact is the government is refusing point blank to have a national inquiry. Now, Rupert Lowe and a couple of others are putting together a crowdfunder to have their own inquiry. It's a joke. It's a bad joke. It's a grift. Because if the inquiry is not statutory, does not have the right to compel witnesses, it cannot do anything. And frankly, a lot of the victims don't want another inquiry into the crimes against them. They do want to sort out the systems of authority that covered it up and allowed it to go on for such a long time.
Yeah.
We don't need to hear about rapes for that. We don't need to go through all that. We know how ghastly it was. We really do. What we need to do is find out where the cover-up was, who was backing it, who was supporting it, who was too frightened to talk, why were they too frightened to talk, and heads need to roll. But a voluntary self-funded inquiry is onanism on the part of those people who are doing it, because they will not be able to achieve anything beneficial. Hundreds of thousands of people will be donating to something that essentially does nothing. And the victims of those crimes have their horrors retold. So, frankly, but that doesn't mean, and I suspect, and I know that it's something we'll be looking at, along with net zero, DEI, trade, lowering taxes, et cetera, migration. I think in the event of a reform or reform-led coalition, a reform government or reform-led coalition, a proper, serious, deep dive inquiry into the cover-up and the political circumstances that allowed that cover-up to take place will take place. But it will be serious, it'll be properly funded, it will be properly resourced, and it will have the power to compel witnesses and to have serious impacts on how things work. Everything else is just, as I say, it's political onanism, and that's sad.
Gawain, thank you for your time. I've got to go, but really appreciate you carving some space out for us today. I know you're slammed, so thank you very much.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Cheers. Hope you enjoyed Gawain Towler. He's one of my favorite guys to interview. He's been with CDM for some time, and thank you for supporting the SCIF. That's all we got today. We're going to be back tomorrow. I think we're going to have David Clements on, talk about election issues, and we're going to focus on whatever geopolitical news comes around. But we are 10 to noon, Monday through Friday Eastern. Please support us. Tell your friends about it. Spread the links, and help people come to find the SCIF, because we're one of the best intelligence shows out there. We'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thank you.